world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Friday, February 13th, as I am recording this. Now, once again, recording a little later at night than I would have liked. Day got away from me with work and everything else, but here I am. We have a daily show. Or almost daily show, I guess, and we're going to be discussing a lot of the things going on in the world of news and politics. And as I say every day, there's a lot to talk about. Because there's always a lot to talk about. Now, I want to start off with something a little more ridiculous as we are discussing it here. And what I want to discuss as I'm pulling up, I've got a list here of things I want to discuss. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was this article out of the Wall Street Journal. And this article out of the Wall Street Journal is talking about the head of the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Nome, and her direct subordinate, Lewandowski. Now, apparently, according to this article out of the Wall Street Journal, that this is one of the worst kept secrets in Washington, D.C. Apparently, Lewandowski and Kristi Noem are having some kind of clandestine affair. Apparently, they are using any and all excuses to meet up. There is a plane, apparently, they are paying rent on. That this plane, apparently, they are attempting to purchase for the Department of Homeland Security. But they've been using it to travel back and forth across the country. Now, what we are hearing, though, is about this plane is apparently at one of their stops recently. And I don't know when it, I don't know if it elaborated in the article. It didn't in the article I read about the Wall Street Journal article. But apparently there was a stop where they had to switch planes because of some issue. Not even sure what the issue was, but they had to switch planes anyway. And apparently there was a blanket that was not moved from plane to plane by staff. And Kristi Noem was so upset that her blanket did not get moved from location to location that they fired the pilot over it. Now, this makes no sense because, mistakes happen, but this is where we were at with this administration. And apparently, then they turned around, they had to end up hiring the guy back on the spot, the pilot, because they realized they didn't have a leg to stand on because they needed somebody to fly the plane to get them where they needed to go. Just more incompetence out of this administration. Now, I wish I could say I was surprised to find out that they had tried to fire this pilot over a blanket. Now, I don't know if this was some kind of special blanket, like if it had, sentimental significance. But still, at the end of the day, it was a blanket. And they went completely nuts, fired this pilot, this longtime Coast Guard pilot, or tried to. And then they realized that, oh shit, we can't do that. We actually need him to fly the plane and get us home. And this is typical with what this administration has done. Remember, Doge went through and they were gutting people left and right just to have to bring them back because they realized after the fact that, oh shit, we actually need those people and we can't just find anybody to fill that role. So this whole situation is it's a joke, right? and it's laughable at best, incompetent at worst. Um, these are the best people Donald Trump could get around him, were people like this. They couldn't end up coming up with something, you know, better or whatever. And they're using government property, got this government plane to travel back and forth to have this supposed alleged affair. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something out of a TV show or a movie. And if it wasn't for the fact that we hear examples of stuff like this happening all the time around this administration, um, you would think that somebody made it up. But we hear reports of their incompetence on the daily, and it never seems to get any better. Now, uh, in Minneapolis, we haven't talked about Minneapolis for about a week or so. Um, they have been, slowly withdrawing immigration ICE agents, right? And their borders are Tom Homan, this motherfucker who was alleged, who has been caught and um, found on tape to have taken a bribe. But because Donald Trump got in office, that whole thing went away. Uh, this motherfucker decides that they are going to start lowering the number of ICE agents in Minneapolis. No, like last week or so, he said they were going to draw it down by about 700. And now he says Operation Metro Surge, which he is raving about being, you know, a success, is uh, is over. They are slowing down. They are going to be pulling out of Minneapolis, and they're going to move on to their next target, where they're going to be going after this next large scale um, operation. Okay, they're going to be looking into doing another big immigration push, trying to crack down and go. They're looking for another soft target. Minneapolis, they thought was going to be a soft target. And what do I mean by a soft target? They didn't expect pushback in Minneapolis. They thought they were going to be able to roll into Minneapolis, say, hey, we're here, and that Minneapolis would just say, yeah, okay, do your thing. We're not going to stop you. Well, that's not what happened. They get in and they do their thing, and they're met with some amount of protests and things like that, and then they fuck up. And it's because they always fuck up because they have untrained people in their ranks. And what happened is they shot Renee Good, and they killed her over nothing, right? She was given conflicting orders. Um, she was told by one officer, "You're free to go." The other officer told her, "Don't move." And then when she went after being told she was free to go, she got shot. And then the officer referred to her as a fucking bitch after he had shot her. Um, then you have the shooting of Alex Preddy. I mean, they've killed two people in Minneapolis, and 70,000 plus have been out protesting ICE almost since. Well, now they are saying they are drawing down their ICE agents and they are going to end um, their reign of terror, I guess. They didn't call it that. I'm calling it that. But Tom Holman said it was a very successful operation inside of Minneapolis. Though they've been in Minneapolis going on like 2 months, something like that. How many people do you think they got? How many immigrants did they arrest in this massive millions of dollar project where they had agents? They had 3,000 ICE agents in Minneapolis doing these roving raids for weeks on end. How many people do you think they got? Million? Half a million? 100,000? Was it a huge thing? No, they got 4,000 people. Now, it sounds like a lot, but that averages out to about 1.3 arrests per ICE agent over the entirety, not per day, per agent over the entirety of the almost 2 months they've been in Minneapolis. That is ridiculously low. It just proves that going after immigrants was not the main focus. This was about fear and control and trying to get people wound up. Um, and I think on some levels, I think there were people in this administration were hoping that it would have turned violent. Now, Donald Trump has been wanting to use the Insurrection Act to quell a rebellion, um, because he thinks that will give him some amount of leverage where he can activate the military. The military would be able to go up against civilians, and he could flex his might. Beyond that, he's hoping that if something like that were to happen, it would justify everything he is doing, everything he is saying, and that it would give him some kind of cover when it comes to the midterms because he's terrified of losing the midterms. Now, uh, calling what happened in Minneapolis a very successful operation is laughable at best. Um, it wasn't successful. They did not succeed in any way, shape, or form. They got roasted in the courts with some of the things they were doing. They were told to release certain prisoners, including a 5-year-old that had been detained with their father, and then had been used as bait to try to get other people out of the house, and then was taken to an ICE detention facility out of state, despite the fact that they were told by no uncertain terms by a judge not to. And that's the other half of this. They've been pushing their luck with the judges, and the judges are getting to the point where they're not having it. So when these judges start saying, "Hey, I gave you um, a direct order that you were supposed to follow and you didn't, why shouldn't I hold you in contempt?" And you're going to start seeing people being held in contempt by judges over ICE and their actions and things like that. This immigration problem isn't nearly the thing that they want us to believe it is. Now, they would have you believe that undocumented illegal immigrants are doing all sorts of fraud, that they are doing all sorts of um, voting, that they are ripping off the benefit systems, things like that. And that's not the case. For example, when it comes to acquiring any sort of government program, WIC, whether they get food stamps, whether they get Medicaid, daycare assistance, any of those programs, guess what? Already a law on the books, already a thing they look for is if they are a citizen. Guess what? Non-citizens do not qualify for any federal money. Now, certain states may have provisions that allow for undocumented immigrants to qualify for state level money. That's entirely different. But they do not qualify for anything on the federal level. They don't get food stamps, they don't get any of it. The only benefit that they get is something everybody gets. And I've talked about it before, and I'm going to bring it up again. And that is when it comes to healthcare. They do get Medicaid to cover emergency room visits, only if they do not pay. And this was a law passed by one of the Republican Lord and Saviors, Ronald Reagan. Now, this law that was passed by Reagan says that the emergency room cannot turn you away, regardless of your ability to pay and regardless of your insurance or immigration status. And the idea behind it would be if something serious enough happened to you that you went to the ER, you could get treated. That was the idea. That was the intent. Okay. if you go to the ER because you broke your arm and you don't have insurance and you don't have the money to pay, the idea was you should still be able to get your arm set and be able to leave the ER in a cast, and regardless of your ability to pay. But where Medicaid comes in on the federal level is that if you go to the ER and you don't have the ability to pay, Medicaid pays the hospital that bill eventually. Why? Because they want to make the hospital as whole as possible so that everybody else doesn't have to end up eating that cost. If that wasn't a thing, that person who had their arm set at the hospital, and I'm going to make it simple, if that was $1,000 bill, right? That $1,000 would then effectively be spread out amongst everybody else who goes to the hospital over the next month. Let's say that's 1,000 people. Everybody's bill goes up by $1, something like that. You know, they would recoup that money somewhere else and everybody else would pay it anyway. So by doing it this way, hospitals are not going to have to raise their prices to offset every time somebody shows up at the ER and gets treatment when they don't have an ability to pay. And I'm sure we all know somebody who abuses the ER. I know I've known people in my own life who knew they couldn't go get treated in some cases by a regular doctor. I knew somebody who was, and it took me unfortunately longer than it probably should have to realize the behavior, but they were drug seeking. They were. Um, and they realized they couldn't get what they needed from a regular doctor. So they would make up a reason to go to the ER and ultimately um, try to get seen for something different to get access to pain pills or whatever they were trying to get access to. But they were abusing the ER in that way. And they knew that they could be seen and they had to at least be evaluated. Now, not always would they get some pain meds or whatever, but they knew that the ER couldn't turn them away. Now, as far as undocumented immigrants and using the ER, a lot of them, if they do not have insurance, they're not going to go unless it is an absolute emergency. Again, they are not going to risk trying to run up a bill or doing things like that or potentially breaking the law, by getting seen and not paying it. Um, they're not going to risk those things in order to just get some benefit. But what Republicans run on is this idea that undocumented immigrants somehow collect something out of it. So if they go to the ER because they need treatment, going back to the broken arm situation, if you had an undocumented immigrant who broke their arm, Republican MAGAs will come out and say, "Well, yeah, they're getting paid for that." No, they don't get a dime. They just get their arm fixed and allowed to be able to, go back to work. Or, maybe they have a severe case of bronchitis or pneumonia or something and they need antibiotics. They would get that treatment and hopefully be able to start feeling a little bit better and maybe get back to work. Now, the other thing that Republicans and MAGAs would tell you, and they don't understand and they don't want to understand, is that undocumented illegal immigrants um, pay into a system they can never collect from. So even if they are using somebody else's identity to work, right? And that's what we always hear from people on the right is, well, they're just using somebody else's identity in their papers, but they're not actually paying in anything to taxes. Well, a lot of them do pay taxes. they still hold out a withholding of some kind. Their Social Security benefit gets withheld. Their Medicaid benefit gets withheld from their check. But do they get any of those benefits? Can they apply for Social Security and retire? No. Can they apply for Social Security disability when something bad happens and they can't work? No. Do they qualify for Medicaid? No. They don't qualify for Medicaid or Medicare. Again, the only benefit they get is if something's drastic enough that they go to the ER for it, they would get that. So they're kicking money into all of these programs, but they cannot collect any of it. Um, so that's what's going on there. I mean, MAGAs would have you believe that there is something huge going on when it comes to undocumented immigrants, that they are trying to rip us off. It's not the case. Uh, they view it as they view the social safety net programs like a pie. And well, if you cut the pie into more pieces, everybody gets a smaller piece. In reality, it's more like a level. And if you balance everybody perfectly even, then everybody's on the same footing. And that's more of the reality to it. But uh, MAGA doesn't want to see that, right? They don't want to think about it that way. They think that somehow these undocumented immigrants are coming in and they are just ruining everything, and that's just not true. Now, the other thing that has been brought up, and I think I've talked about it before, is the SAVE Act. They passed it in the House of Representatives. Now, the SAVE Act passed the House. I don't think it gets through the Senate, and I don't think it gets through judicial review. But what is the SAVE Act? Well, we've talked about it before. The SAVE Act is this bill that would require you to provide some form of an ID to vote, but specific IDs, and not necessarily would your state issued driver's license or state issued ID qualify. And they want to make it so that your ID must match your birth certificate. Well, why your birth certificate? Well, in part because that disenfranchises people. Republicans will say, well, it's not that big of a deal. Your ID should match your birth certificate, but you don't always get an updated birth certificate when you change your name. I can think of lots of reasons why you would change your name. And these are some of the groups that Republicans do not want to be able to vote. At least, they don't think their vote should count nearly as much. Uh, Married women. A lot of women take their husband's last name when they get married. And once you do, the name on your ID would no longer match your birth certificate. People who are trans. Again, Republicans don't want to view them as people. So, you know, if they have gone through the whole process of getting a new name and filed the legal paperwork to change said name, well, now it wouldn't necessarily match unless they got updated documentation. And that would be a group of people who could not vote. This is all about keeping people from voting because Republicans know when voters turn out, they lose. Higher voter turnout always favors Democrats in almost every situation. Now, beyond that, there are going to be some people who say, "Well, I have my documentation. Why don't you have yours?" Again, all kinds of reasons as to why you wouldn't have your documentation. Uh, Again, a lot of Republican MAGAs don't care about whether or not women have the right to vote. But say you have a woman who has left a domestic violence situation. She may have had to run and does not have access to her all of her paperwork. Um, I know here in Iowa when it comes to adoptees cannot go to their local courthouse and get a copy of their birth certificate. Republicans don't care. Oh, well, just go to your local courthouse. Just go get your birth certificate. I've heard that. I've heard that in conversation. It's not that easy for some people. You go get a copy of your birth certificate. If you are an adoptee in Iowa, you cannot go to your local courthouse. You have to go to the Department of Vital Records. So, which means you got to go down to Des Moines. You got to go take a day, deal with the state, and then, of course, you have to pay fees. So, that's the other part of this whole thing. There are going to be fees involved to get copies of any and all of those documents you need. You know, if you have um, if you've had a legal name change, you would need to have a copy of your original birth certificate and the forms where you changed your name and the final version of that, etc. You know uh, to prove it. Now, if you have been somebody who has been married more than once and you have taken their name in the marriage, you would need, you know, birth certificate, marriage license with name change, divorce decree if you were married more than once, where you changed your name again, and then a next marriage license. That's now 4 documents. And if you don't have access to all of those documents, you would need to pay a fee to get those. And if they want you to get a special ID, again, those IDs are not free. There is usually a cost involved. Now, most Republicans and even some liberals, some Democrats, but most Republicans are going to say, well, everybody should have some form of an identification. Why wouldn't you have an ID? Well, some people don't. What happens to the guy who lost his wallet? Now, throwing it out there, but people lose their wallets every single day. It happens, right? You lose your wallet. You have to go replace all of your stuff. Well, I think here in Iowa, the last time I got an ID renewed, I want to say it was like $30. Now, I could be remembering wrong. It was several years ago, and it's probably only gone up since then. But still, there's a cost. It's not free. And that affects your ability to vote. And that becomes a poll tax. And poll taxes are illegal because there should be no barriers between you and your right to vote. And what Republicans don't understand is that no, Democrats are not trying to fight for or defend undocumented illegal immigrants to allow them to vote. They are trying to defend everybody who should be able to vote, having access to that ballot and being able to vote. That's what they're trying to do. Now, when it comes down to it, is this thing going to pass the Senate? I don't think so. Is it going to hold up to judicial review? I don't think so. But it's not going to stop the Republicans from trying. Now, the big thing that I think they are doing beyond anything is they are trying to set themselves up so they have something to campaign on. They can point to the Democrats and say, those damn dirty Democrats, they wouldn't vote to protect our elections, and they want undocumented illegal immigrants voting all the time. And I can already hear Donald Trump saying that exact thing because that is how he thinks. It's a distraction, it's a diversion, it's a way to get out from underneath everything that is going on. And he is going to be able to try to demonize the Democrats for not wanting safe and secure elections, when in fact the Democrats do want those things, but they just want everybody to have the ability to cast a ballot. Now, I've talked about it before here in Iowa. If you don't have your ID or you're at the wrong precinct or whatever, you could cast what they call a provisional ballot. Now, provisional ballots do get counted, but if somebody else shows up with an ID and claims to be you, and they will only count one of those ballots. Beyond that, there are other ways to prove your identity. Now, I'm pretty sure in Iowa you can bring two pieces of mail, one of them being like an official letter, like from, the local city government, whether that's like a letter on your property taxes or your water bill or something like that. Or you can have somebody sign a, uh, a form saying that they attest to the fact that you are who you say that you are. You know them, or you know that person, and that you know that they are who they are claiming to be for the purposes of voting. And then again, same thing. They would give you a provisional ballot. The same thing also happens if you show up at the wrong precinct. They would give you a provisional ballot, and you can go ahead and vote. And as long as nobody else claims to be you, your vote counts and you move on. But not good enough for Republicans. Now, there is a ridiculously small number of um, voter fraud cases ever. It's just not something that happens. It's a statistical anomaly, actually. And the few cases we have heard, the majority of them end up being Republicans trying to vote for somebody else. Like I remember there was multiple stories of, especially around the election of Donald Trump, or trying to elect Donald Trump, I believe in both 2020 and 2024, where you would hear that, like, the husband took the wife's ballot and tried to vote as the wife, or the son tried to vote as the dead mother, things like that. Um, you didn't typically hear about those type of things happening when it came to the Republican Party, or I mean the Democratic Party. I'm sorry, I said the Republican Party. They were typically Republicans when they cast those ballots trying to help Donald Trump win, thinking they were doing something patriotic. Okay. Now I want to move on to a couple other things, mostly Epstein related. Now, uh, Representative Liu in the House of Representatives Oversight Committee the other day was talking to Pam Bondi and called her out for perjury. I talked about that, I believe, on yesterday's podcast. Uh, but he gave her a very direct message. And he said, I think you have perjured yourself, and make no mistake, we are going to investigate it and we are going to impeach you when we get the House back. Now, they're saying that they are going to impeach Pam Bondi. Wouldn't surprise me if they do. And they would do it after they have control of the House back, of course, after the midterms. And the reason they have to wait until the midterms is because, well, they don't have the authority right now, being in the minority, to actually bring it to the floor. They would need help. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, can just bury anything and not do it. But the fact is, he said, we are going to impeach you for it. You should resign now. Now, maybe there is an outside chance that she would resign closer toward the beginning of the next Congress if the Democrats are as successful as I think they could be. Now, they could potentially end up having control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And that may be enough for people like Pam Bondi to go, oh shit, I better run for the hills. I better get out of Dodge. Um, but Representative Liu was saying they plan to impeach after they take back over because they believe Pam Bondi has committed impeachable offenses, specifically surrounding their handling of the Epstein files. Now, continuing with the Epstein files, Donald Trump comes out and he is asked at a press conference yesterday, Thursday, if he knew about Howard Lutnick being at Epstein's Island. And he said, well, I wasn't aware of that. But from what I hear, he took his wife and his kids there because I guess you do that. They'll never say I was at the island. They'll come out later and they'll say I was never there because I wasn't there, that kind of thing. And Donald Trump wants us to believe he was never on the island. Yet there are references to Donald Trump in the files. He is mentioned over 1 million times, is what they were talking about in that hearing with Pam Bondi. 1 million mentions. To put it in perspective, that would mean he is mentioned more in the Epstein files than Harry Potter is mentioned in the entirety of the Harry Potter series. He has more mentions than Jesus in the Bible. And that's the tip of the iceberg, right? Now, he says he was never at the island, but I believe there's at least one email from Jeffrey to somebody saying that they were going to the island with Donald Trump in tow and asking if they had enough diapers on hand. Now, I don't know if that was a legitimate excerpt from one of the emails or not. Either way, it is embarrassing to Donald Trump. And he's trying to draw attention away from the fact that multiple people around him are connected to the Epstein files. And his biggest way of saying it is, well, I didn't know anything about Howard Lutnick going to the island. Oh, but he took his wife and kids there. Like that makes it better for one, but two, he's saying he didn't know anything about it and then had an example of the guy you were just asking about going to the island. He said it both ways in that interview, and he really didn't get called out on it. You would think he would have gotten called out, but as always, when it comes to this administration, the media did not push back hardly at all. Um, but Donald Trump is desperate to get away from the Epstein files. Now we are, uh, and he is trying, but we can tell the stress is getting to him. Now, I talked about this yesterday. I talked about him getting this world champion of good, clean coal prize. And he gets this prize from the coal industry, trying to make it sound like he's got some big connection. He's done something, right? And as I talked about yesterday, it's very similar to what South Park put out as an idea, where you want something from Donald Trump, you show up, you give him a gift, mention the fact that he doesn't have a small penis, and he'll do whatever you want. Well, these coal miners give him this prize, and he's in mid sentence, and he's like, "Well, I am the undisputed," and it just trails off. And then he kind of, after a second, he kind of catches himself. Mike, when did this come out? Like he had an event on TV live where it looked like he lost the ability to speak for a little bit. Now, everybody has those moments where you just can't get the words out and you trip over your own thing. But not everybody wants you to believe that they are a very stable genius and that they are, mentally as fit as they were 40 years ago or more. See, and that's where Donald Trump is at this point. He's having moments like this more and more frequently. And when he does have these events, the press really doesn't push him on it because his administration is not going to probably answer questions about that. They want to deny, deny, deny. But clearly, Donald Trump is having major problems. And this just highlights how bad off his health actually is. Okay. We've been talking about the bruising on his hands, which I believe is from him getting IV treatments of some kind, or maybe it's just fluids or something. But I think he is routinely getting an IV of some kind. I think beyond that, he is also uh, suffering from some amount of dementia. Now, he wants to play it off that it's not that big of a deal. But a few weeks ago, he was in an interview and they were asking him about his father's having dementia and things like that. And he said, "Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think I have what's it called?" Then he was pointing at his head, and his press secretary had to fill in the word for him because he couldn't think of the word dementia or Alzheimer's. And I think ultimately Donald Trump is it's going to come out and something's going to happen. One of these events is going to happen on stage where they can't deny it anymore, where he is in such bad shape that the Republicans are going to have to make a uh, they're going to have to make a decision about um, what is going on, right? Like they're going to have to decide to move away from him because they're not going to be able to hide it anymore and hide how bad off he actually is. Now, this incident was him mid word where he just kind of sputtered out into gibberish. And the Republicans are going to, in the MAGAs, are going to try to say, well, what about Joe Biden? Joe Biden had a stutter. Okay. Joe Biden stutters. We know this. This is not something that is new. That's different than what we are talking about here. Now, the Republicans tried to use that as to say Joe Biden didn't know what was going on, or he was clearly uh, suffering from dementia or whatever. And that wasn't even close to the case. This is very different from a stutter. Now, Joe Biden had a documented stutter, one where we knew for a long time that he would trip over words. He worked very hard at fixing his stutter to the best he could, but the older he got, it was still a problem. And the Republicans like to point to it as some kind of mental incompetence, and we know it's not. But that's just who the Republicans are. They like to bully, and if they can't bully, they're not happy. Um, so they're going to try to draw parallels between what's going on with Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But I think you are going to see more and more as the days, the weeks, and maybe even the months go on that you are going to find out that they are, uh, you know, that the stress of the presidency is getting to Donald Trump. Is I guess is what I was trying to say there. That the stress of being president is getting uh, worse, and he is going to end up having more issues like this because he is dealing with all of the stressors. I mean, just being suffering from dementia has got to be stressful in and of itself. And then you add the fact that you have the most stressful job in the world and being president of the United States has got to compound that stress. Now, Donald Trump will never admit this. And one of the things that gives a lot of people hope is when we talk about Donald Trump and dementia, is something that came out of the Epstein files. In those files, there is an email going all the way back to 2017, Donald Trump's first year of being president. And there is an email from Jeffrey Epstein to somebody, and he's talking about Donald Trump and says that they suspect Donald Trump has dementia because he couldn't even recognize old friends. That was almost 10 years ago. And for a lot of people, 10 years is the upper limit of how long they can go with dementia and survive, which could mean that the end could be coming for Donald Trump. And that's entirely possible. Now, if something were to happen to Trump, what happens, right? Well, I've talked about it before, but I'm going to talk about it again. Well, first thing that would happen is if Donald Trump does not make it, if one of these days he just does not wake up, well, JD Vance would become president on the spot. He would get a judge, does not have to be a Supreme Court justice, just has to be a judge. They will give him the oath of office. He raises his hand, repeats the oath, and the entire powers of the government fall into JD Vance's hands. And then he is going to start making moves. And I think one of the things he does is he gets rid of a lot of these advisors, maybe not all at once, but he starts getting rid of people connected to Donald Trump, trying to raise his profile and raise his stakes for the uh, for the midterms. Not even the midterms, but for 28 when he runs again. And maybe if it's early enough ahead of the midterms that they are trying to right the ship because they could end up losing the House and the Senate in the midterms. So, first things first, he becomes president. Then he gets to appoint his own VP. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, does not automatically become the VP. The only time Mike Johnson would advance up is if something happened to Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't make it. JD Vance becomes president. And before JD can appoint his own VP and have Congress approve it, something happened to JD Vance. And then Mike Johnson would move up. It's not an automatic you move up one step when the president passes away. Because if you did that, what would happen is the Senate, the Speaker pro tem of the Senate, which is the longest serving member of the majority party, which right now is Iowa's own Chuck. I am older than chocolate chip cookies, 92-year-old Chuck Grassley. He would be moved from the House to the or from the Senate to the House and become Speaker of the House, and that doesn't happen. What would happen is JD Vance would appoint a VP. Congress would probably confirm it, depending on who he picks, and then they would move on. The only other way Mike Johnson moves up at all is if Mike Johnson would happen to be the person they pick to be speaker or to be the VP, but I don't see that happening. Mike Johnson's a very ineffective and a very weak Speaker of the House. I don't think he has a future in national politics. More than likely, they would pick somebody reasonable, say Brian Kemp out of Georgia or Chris Christie, somebody like that. Somebody who has cut ties with MAGA at least at some point, and they would try to make the best of it. Now, there is some suggestions that going out there and some things I've seen where they'd say, well, once Donald Trump's out of the picture, JD Vance would pick a reasonable Republican, and then they would just impeach and remove Vance. But the thing is, in order to impeach and remove Vance, they would need Democratic support. And the Democrats aren't just going to turn around and give up if they think that they are, trying to set themselves up in better position and it's not a genuine impeachment for something that was actually wrong. Democrats aren't just going to go along with that. They're going to step back and go, yeah, you made your bed, you got to lie in it. You are going to be stuck with JD Vance. Now, if they have a legitimate reason to impeach and remove JD Vance down the road, Democrats may listen to it. But they're not just going to go along and set the Republicans up in better shape for both the midterms and in 28. So, while we are watching Donald Trump's health, it is probably going to be a foregone conclusion. I just think one way or the other, Donald Trump does not make it out as president all the way to 2029. I think one of these mornings he just doesn't wake up and we get the one big beautiful obituary we're all waiting to read. Um, or there's going to come a point when the Republicans say, okay, we got to move on you because you are costing us elections and you're now a lame duck and we can't win with you at the top of the ticket. They could either one of those things could be true or something comes out from the files that is so damning that they don't have a choice but to say, okay, we have to move away from this guy. There's no way we can defend it. We can't support this anymore. We have to do something. And when that happens, I'm expecting it to be a dog pile. If the Republicans decide that now is the time to move on Donald Trump, I firmly think what will happen is when they make that choice, you are going to see uh, a vote held in the House of Representatives. It's going to be very close up until it hits the magic number of 218 to pass. And then you were going to see a snowball effect of Republicans tripping over themselves trying to get rid of Donald Trump. And then it's going to go to the Senate. I think if the Republicans lead the impeachment effort and it goes to the Senate, I firmly think Donald Trump, or any Republican for that matter, if they get impeached while Republicans have control, that it's a foregone conclusion that they will be removed. And when that happens, I just think it's going to be a dog pile. It's not even going to be close, and that the Republicans are going to just stack up against whoever it is, presumably Donald Trump, and just say, okay, we're doing this, and you're gone. Um, and then obviously, if they do move on, Donald Trump, JD Vance would become president, and then everything, like I said earlier, would come to pass. He'd appoint his own VP and so on. But then I think beyond that, he'd be given marching orders by the party, and some of the things he would do is to right the ship, basically, and try to fix the image of the Republican Party. Not that it's going to actually work, but I think that's when you're going to see people like Kristi Noem and Linda McMahon and Dr. Oz all kind of either quietly, or he's going to ask for resignations, or maybe he fires them all one way or the other. But I think all of those advisors slowly go away. And I think JD Vance would actually be able to get more qualified people around him. Now, speaking of some of his advisors, we have two conflicting things coming out from um, two of his advisors. And one is we had heard from RFK Jr. for months about how we didn't need vaccines and how he was, we don't need to be pushing at this and that. Well, now Dr. Oz is coming out and trying to encourage people to get their children the measles vaccine, which I figured something like that would happen over, the course of time because of how bad measles is, and they're realizing that, oh shit, maybe actually getting our kids vaccinated is a good thing. I saw a TikTok of somebody talking about, well, is chickenpox still a thing? And you don't hear about kids having chickenpox anymore. And well, turns out you get your kids vaccinated, they don't get the chickenpox. And it's not nearly as big of a deal as it was when, say, we were kids. Um, so, you know, we're hearing that this administration is having to go back and now tell people to get the vaccine for measles. And that contradicts everything RFK Jr. is saying. But then, speaking about RFK Jr., I don't know if you saw this clip, but he was talking about COVID. And he said the reason he wasn't scared of the COVID, of getting COVID, was because he used to do, I think it was Coke, off of toilet seats. And that's the guy at the head of Health and Human Services right now. That's the guy telling you don't get a vaccine. That he was doing illicit substances off of toilet seats, and that was somehow going to protect him from COVID. And yet, there's going to be a section of MAGA that is going to say, "Oh man, that's great. We should really listen to this guy. Clearly, he knows something about building an immune system. If he wasn't scared of COVID." Something like that. They're going to find any excuse to go along with it, and that's just ridiculous. But these people are absolute clowns. And how can you take them seriously when they are contradicting themselves now at this point when it comes to vaccines, saying things like, well, maybe we should get the measles vaccine, or I wasn't worried about COVID because I was doing substances off of a toilet seat. These people are a joke. And these are the best advisors Donald Trump could end up finding. All right, so that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. Of course, I'm going to be back tomorrow because there's always a lot to talk about. And I hope you have a great day. And I will catch you on tomorrow's podcast.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.